Welcome in, everybody. It is Tuesday, November 19th. It is officially Ohio State Week, top five matchup on Saturday afternoon in Columbus, Indiana, ranked number five, Ohio State ranked number two. Significant college football playoff and Big Ten title implications on the line there. We will break it all down in this week's podcast. Matt Weaver joining me, Jared Kelly here of Peegs.com. But first, Matt, I did want to start with the huge news, obviously, over the weekend with Curt Cignetti. Indiana was on a bye week, but Indiana still finds a way to make themselves, headline worthy. Curt Cignetti, 8-year, $8 million per year extension with the added kicker of a $1 million retention bonus. So, however you want to slice that, $9 million a year basically over the next 8 years, which will take him through the 2032 season, assuming he stays at IU through the end of his contract. Matt, the news came pretty early Saturday morning when you first saw it, when you first heard it. What were your kind of thoughts on first of all the dollar amount and then just Indiana's commitment overall to keeping him here?
Yeah, I mean, kind of a wow moment. I know Jeff Rabjohn's on our site's been, basically strongly hinting and reporting that this was in the works. Um, Obviously, I assumed it was going to be a pretty big number. Eight, I thought probably, at least seven. So I wasn't totally shocked by eight. And then when you factor in that retention bonus, it's almost like 9 million a year. But kudos to Indiana for stepping up to the plate and making that kind of commitment to Cignetti and the football program. That's it's. I was on the radio this morning, 107.5, and they asked me about it. Like, it's only been 1 year. It's been against the schedule that obviously is not the strongest. And I said, yeah, there is some risk. There's obviously risk here, but when you look at his track record, I think this is risk that's I mean, it's really mitigated because of what he's done as a coach in his career. In fact, I even said this. I said, this is, he's 63. This is his first opportunity at this level. Some coaches might kind of get a little, I don't want to say lazy, but once they get that contract, maybe but I think this is going to motivate him to work harder. I think this is going to be his motivation to basically stick it up everybody's, what, even more and say, hey, I'm worth this money. I'm worth this contract. And Indiana made the right move by signing me to it. So I think, I don't think anything's going to change about Curt Cignetti, the coach. He is who he is. I don't care if he's making a million, 10 million, or 20 million. I mean, he's going to keep doing things the way he does things. So, but, I think it's great. And then obviously the fact that there's going to be more money for the assistants. I also made the point on the radio this morning. It's interesting that Cignetti started, or I'm sorry, not Cignetti, Scott Dolson hinted at the stadium improvements. And Kansas kind of tied that in. If you remember, it was a year or two ago when they gave Leipold the extension. Now, I'm not saying Indiana's going to do the same kind of, because I think that was like a huge renovation for Kansas, like hundreds of millions of dollars. But it's interesting that they kind of came out at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, it's obvious. It seems to me obvious that this is kind of tied together. And I'm sure there's other things that they're still behind the scenes. But I just thought that was interesting that this all kind of came out at the same time. Dolson mentioned it, and then the extension comes out, maybe a few days later. But this is what you're supposed to do when you're at this level. You're supposed to invest in football. It provides the majority of your money for your athletic department, and you finally hit the jackpot with the coach, and you need to do everything you can to keep him.
Yeah, we'll see the full contract details in whenever we get them in the next couple of days. Hopefully, we have filed a FOIA request for that. So hopefully, we get the full contract details to see what exactly is all in there. Bonuses, incentives, the sort of contract language in terms of facilities and Indiana's side, the commitment there from Indiana's side. But I think it is notable, Matt, that we've seen reports that the assistant coaching salary pool was going to get a nice boost here to go along with the contract extension. And then you also have to imagine that facilities upgrades, commitments to that are also embedded in that contract as well. And Scott Dolson last night, he was on the Indiana basketball radio show talking about Cignetti's extension. He said that Cignetti wasn't out there just for money for himself, right? He wanted to ensure that Indiana was also committed to building these other things around him to move the program in a better direction here. And I think that's super important as well because Cignetti could have just taken the money and run. Well, not run, but just taking the money for himself. But the fact that he wants to ensure that all these other things are getting addressed as well, I think that's super important for the program too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that listen, I mean, I'm sure Kirk Cignetti loves to get paid. Um, what he's getting paid. I remember sitting in his office back in March, whenever it was when we did the sit down, and he talked about it how he had a great job at James Madison, and he was making good money. I mean, over $1 million. That's a lot of money. Um, but Indiana intrigued him because it was the Big Ten, it was the highest level, and obviously they really improved his pay. It was a 6 year, what, 24, $25 million contract that he signed, and he talked about how that was kind of life changing kind of money for him and his family. This is obviously even more so. They just doubled it. But I think the biggest thing for him though is taking care, giving him the resources to build the staff he needs, to have the infrastructure as far as the facilities and just the stuff like that the players need on a day to day basis and want on a day to day basis. And then obviously, that we're going to revenue sharing, or whatever you want to call it. Guys are going to basically start getting paid by the schools. That's coming here soon. But NIL is still going to be important. And obviously, I know Indiana doesn't. The university itself doesn't contribute directly to NIL, but they're the face of trying to get NIL from people through the collectives. And I think that's a big deal for him as too. Real quick, and I thought the story you put up was great. Kudos to Scott Dolson for not waiting for schools to start coming after Cignetti and making a knee jerk reaction. He was proactive and went out there and basically said, "Hey, we want you to stay. This is what we're willing to pay." So kudos to him. It could have been easy for him to kind of wait and see what the market kind of. He went out and set the market for Cignetti himself, and that's at a school like Indiana, at least with football, you never see that. So, major props to Scott Dolson for doing that. And obviously President Witten has been a big part of this too. And I think a lot of people owe them a big thanks for what's going on with football.
Yeah, I mean, Dolson deserves all the credit in the world for making that decision last November, which couldn't have been easy to fire Tom Allen, pay that $20 million buyout, and then really go out and get Cignetti, the guy that he wanted from the start. So, yeah, major kudos to those two, him and President Pam Whitten for getting that done. Now that it's in the rearview mirror, Matt, Kurt Cignetti has talked all the time about, we don't do distractions in this program. We keep all the outside noise out. But for him, you'd have to imagine it's a little distracting to have these contract negotiations going on in the background while you're trying to coach through a season, whether he wants to admit it or not. So for him, that's got to be a little bit of a relief, monkey off the back type thing. Now that he knows, he's going to be here for the long term. He doesn't have to worry about, is Indiana going to offer me? Is another school going to come? For him, now he can really just lock in on finishing the season strong.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. He said, I was at the press conference yesterday, and he said that 3 or 4 weeks ago, he played the what if game with his wife and with his agent. Like, what if? And I'm assuming he means like, what if this school would come calling, or what if And that tells me that he and then my guess is probably around the time Indiana maybe started reaching out and started starting. Hey, we're willing to do a new contract or extend it, however you want to, whatever you want to call it. So it tells you that something that was in his mind. Now that's off the table. He and I don't, like I said, I think he's just doing that. I mean, Kurt Cignetti's this is a guy, he didn't get a head coach job till he was 50. His career has been a lot different than a lot of people. He's obviously when you sit down and talk to him, very intelligent guy. He understands the business, and he's got to ask himself that question: what if so and so calls? And he said everything pointed to him saying Indiana. That's why I've always said I never thought he was going to leave. I think Indiana and him are a great fit because of his personality and kind of being a chip on your shoulder guy. Indiana's a perfect school for him. But now that's off the table, like you said. He knows where he's going to be. He's got this contract, and not that he wouldn't focus on football anyways. But he if he doesn't get this contract done, his agent's probably calling maybe every other day, or I don't know. Hey, so and so just reached out to me. They want to know if you'd be interested. Now that's done. There's not many phone calls. He's going to be focused on Indiana, which he would have been anyways. But that eliminates that potential distraction. It's great. It's great that Indiana can go out there and say we've got a coach that other schools would want, and he's ours for close to almost a decade.
Yeah, yeah, it's just a really strong voice of commitment there from Indiana to reach out to him and be proactive in that regard. Matt, any final thoughts here before we move forward? I know the Cignetti extension is still pretty fresh in people's minds. Did you have any lingering thoughts on that?
No, like I said, it's just this is not something that I've ever seen. I mean, I remember when Indiana first went over paid Allen, and it was more than the basketball coach. Now we're double what Mike Woodson paid, at Indiana. Like I never thought I would see that in my lifetime, and it's not that long ago that I mean, it doesn't seem like Bill Lynch was the head coach. I know for some people might seem a long time ago, and he was making like barely around over $1 million or something like that. Now we're at Indiana's paying their coach either 15th highest or 16th. I can't remember what it is in the country. It's incredible. It really is. Now, obviously, a lot of it's because of this media money. But I mean, if I was talking about the friend about this. If you look at, they've had what, four, uh, one, two, they're gonna have like 4 or 5 sellouts in a row. Yeah, I don't know what the average ticket price is for Indiana football. I haven't bought a ticket in forever. But if you get an extra 15 or 20,000, let's just say $40 a pop. If my math right, what is that, $600,000 to $800,000? And then that doesn't include concessions. I mean, the money he's made this athletic department this season, I would guess it's pushing well over 7 figures, probably $1.5 million per game per weekend. When you consider all the people coming into Bloomington and what they're spending money on, it's huge. And I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger, as he continues to be the coach and they continue to win.
Yeah. So Kurt Cignetti locked up through 2032. Like I mentioned, we will get the full contract details when Indiana makes them available, and then obviously we'll have them over on Peegs.com for you guys to look through, and we'll try to sort through all of the little contract language as well to help you guys better understand it. But basically, $8 million a year. $9 million if you want to factor in the retention bonus every year. So that makes him a top 20 paid head coach in the nation, which at Indiana never happened before. Curt Cignetti is the highest paid employee in IU history. So that's good. Indiana's locked in there. You know what you're getting for the next few years. All right, Matt, let's move ahead here. We'll have a mailbag at the end of this podcast, but obviously it's Ohio State week, huge week for Indiana. This is their chance to really prove it to a lot of the doubters. Especially in the CFP conversation, people saying Indiana hasn't played anybody yet. Well, this is their chance to really prove themselves on the road here at Ohio State. And, I know a lot of the discussion right now is centered around the college football playoff, but let's not factor out that the Big Ten title race is still in contention too. And if you go into Ohio State, not only do you lock up the CFP, but you're going to the Big Ten title game, assuming, the Purdue game goes as we all think it will.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's easy to say this is. I mean, this is probably the biggest game in my life that Indiana's played. It's a huge game, and obviously, it's going to be a really tough game. Ohio State's incredibly talented, and it's in the horseshoe with 105, 10,000, whatever they're going to have there. The atmosphere will definitely be rocking. You got big noon kickoff and ESPN College Game Day, both going to be there, doing their pregame show. So yeah, but there is a ton on the line. I mean, a loss doesn't kill you. We've talked about this, unless it's a bad loss. Unless you go there, you kind of get you get waxed, by a couple touchdowns or more. But a win, I mean, a win would be, I guess the only win that would be bigger is the win that in 1967 that put him in the Rose Bowl. But I think this is bigger than that because of where football is, and you're gonna you're gonna get you're automatically, you're for sure, like you said, you're in the playoffs. You'll beat Purdue, even if you lose the Big Ten title game. Just let's say Oregon, you're still in the playoff, and you're probably going to host a game, even if you lose the Big Ten title game. I would think you still got a really good chance to host a game. And obviously, if you would win the Big Ten title game, you're getting a bye. You're going to be maybe the 1 or 2 seed in the country, which is just like I can't even wrap my head around it. So yeah, there's a ton on the line here. It's interesting. Everybody said this is a big game for Indiana. I don't know. Part of me wonders: is there more pressure on Ohio State? Is there more pressure because they're supposed to be here? They're supposed to win this game, and if they lose, they could be done. I mean, even a 2 loss. I mean, I shouldn't say they could be done, but it could put them in a precarious spot if they're getting matched up against SEC teams with 2 losses. It could put them in a tough spot. I think they still probably get in, but in my opinion, Indiana's got nothing to lose. They weren't supposed to be here. They're playing with house money. Go in there and play your game and see what happens. Hopefully they play well. I think they will, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's honestly my impression too, is that, like you said, Indiana has nothing to lose here. I really do think Ohio State has everything riding on this game because, they've already had the one loss at Oregon. Indiana undefeated still. And, you'd have to think, we can get into this in a little bit, but one loss at on the road at Ohio State's not everything. And obviously, Indiana's not going into that game thinking they're going to lose. But you're an Ohio State team playing at home. You have to defend home field, especially against a team like Indiana, where you have perennially beat them every single season and beat them pretty bad. So I agree with you. I think Ohio State has everything to lose here, much more than Indiana does. But it does bring up the conversation, Matt. On the flip side of that is if Indiana does lose here, and we can kind of get into the different scenarios, close loss, big loss, what have you. 11-1 Indiana, if they go into Ohio State and lose, where does that put them in the CFP? Now, there's been a lot of discussion on social media. Obviously, SEC guys want to say, two-loss SEC teams who have lost to ranked teams deserve to be in over Indiana. They can't beat a ranked team, what have you. I think, in my opinion, it's going to be very tough for a CFP committee to keep out a one-loss Big Ten team. But I could see a scenario where the SEC teams, where they look at those quality of losses for those SEC teams and say, you know what, this is better than any of Indiana's wins. The fact that these SEC teams are playing a much tougher schedule. And that's where I do worry. Now, if you keep it within, what is the spread right now? 12 points the spread is. If you keep it, within, two touchdowns, I think it helps Indiana's case there. But I think the worst case scenario is you go into Columbus and you get blown out.
Yeah, and I thought about this. I mean, like, how could the game play out? In 2020, I was there during COVID, and I think Indiana fell behind at half, like 28-7. Then they stormed back, and they had a chance at the end. If the game went like that, how would it look to the committee? Is that better or worse? I mean, you just don't know. Into a game where they just go back and forth, like both teams kind of trade punches, and you're always basically within one score. Um, you know, uh, they just got to go there and play well. I mean, I think losing by a couple touchdowns or more, game where basically it looks like you're not really ever in the game. Like Ohio State's always kind of in control, and you look like you're just hanging on. That's probably going to be tough to overcome. And if you're a game where you just lose like 41-10, obviously that's the worst case, like you said, scenario. Um, it'll be interesting. Like I said, the SEC chatters picked up in the last week. I think because we're getting close to the end of the season, and they're starting to see, okay, Indiana's probably got a really good shot to get in, even if they lose at Ohio State. So I understand it. I get it. The schedule's not great. It's some of that's not Indiana's fault. I mean, Maryland was supposed to be better. Michigan State was probably supposed to be a little bit better. Nebraska was 5-1 when Indiana played them, and they can't. I don't know if Indiana broke them or what, but they've lost 4 in a row. So that's not all on Indiana. The non-conference is on them, but that's the way. That's the way it goes. Like I said, you just go in there, play your game. I think if Indiana plays their game, if they play well, they'll be in that game until the end. Will they win it? I don't know. It's going to be a tough game, but I think they will give Ohio State a very good run for their money. And I think if they do that, they put together a great resume to get into the college football playoff.
Yeah. I've said this for a while now, just talking to other people. I just don't. I mean, I could see a scenario where Indiana gets blown out, but I would put my money on they don't get blown out. I think Indiana's going to go in there and play a very competitive game, win or loss. This is such a well-coached team. They're coming off a bye week. They've had 2 weeks to rest to prepare for Ohio State. It never looks like this season that the moment has gotten too big for them. We saw that especially in the Michigan game when Michigan was really coming on strong there in the second half and threatening to take the lead. And it doesn't really feel like Indiana is ever feeling that pressure on their backs. And this is we just mentioned this where I think Ohio State has a lot of the pressure on their backs compared to Indiana here. And you can talk about the talent disadvantage, the disparity there between Ohio State and Indiana, but there was a talent disparity against Michigan. You could say there was a talent disparity against Washington, against Nebraska, these type of teams. I think Indiana is just so fundamentally sound. And yes, it is a road environment. Yes, it's going to be tough always to play in Columbus. Um, but the halftime adjustments that Indiana has shown to be able to make this season, just coupled with how strong they start games, I find it really hard to believe that they're going to go in there and get blown out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we can get into more of this, but to me, the biggest key is, Indiana's offensive line for 9.5 games has played really, really well. The second half against Michigan, they struggled. And, Michigan's got good players. Ohio State's got really good players. If Indiana blocks, I watched Ohio State against Northwestern, and they won that game going away. But Northwestern was having some success on offense. They were able to move the ball, and they were able to run a little bit. I think Curtis Rourke is better than Lausch. Now, the one thing Lausch offers that Rourke doesn't is when there was a free rusher, he's got the athleticism to kind of make a guy miss and extend the play a little bit. Rourke has shown that, but obviously we know that that's not a strength of his game. But if you protect Curtis Rourke, I think you can make some plays against this secondary. I think Ohio State secondary, you can make some plays against them. We'll see what happens. But that to me is the key. It's football still comes down. I've said this a million times. In my opinion, football still comes down to winning up front. If Indiana can protect Rourke, I think he'll make some throws. They'll move the ball and they'll score some points. It's just, can you protect him and can you run the ball enough? You don't have to run for 180, but you can't be like 20 carries for like 27 yards or something like that. Where you're getting 1 point something to carry. You got to be able to run it a little bit.
Yeah, and that was obviously the issue against Michigan, right, where the offense got bogged down because neither the passing or the rushing game was doing particularly well in that game. Which against Ohio State, you cannot have that happen. And I agree that was sort of my focal point too in this game. Going into this game is you got to win the line of scrimmage here. We saw what happened against Michigan. The pass protection was pretty poor in the second half. Couldn't run the ball at all. You got to win the line of scrimmage at least on defense because Ohio State's coming into this game averaging 183.8 rush yards per game. They're averaging 5.3 yards per carry. They obviously have that two-headed monster with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. If Indiana can, I think the biggest key here for Indiana's defense, especially, you got to limit the run game and make Will Howard beat you through the air. And now I know Jeremiah Smith is a really good receiver. Ohio State has a ton of talent on the outside. But you got to make Will Howard beat you through the air. Otherwise, if you let Ohio State just run all over you, it's going to be a long day for Indiana, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you gotta win up front, but defensively, that includes your linebackers and everybody coming up and being part of the run game. And another thing is, listen, I said on the radio this morning, Ohio State's offense is really good. They're going to move the ball. Okay, you're not just going to shut them down. What you can't have is you can't have those 60, 70-yard explosive plays that go for a touchdown. If they get points, you got to make them earn it. You got to make them go the length of the field. And then hopefully, if they get down in the red zone, you can bow up and maybe hold them to 3 points. If you get them into a 3rd and 8, those are the times when you really got to try to get off the field. But they're going to move the ball. They're too good not to. It's just, can you kind of minimize the damage when they do go down the field a little bit. And like I said, you can't give up those explosive plays like some 70-yard pass like Smith, or a big run by one of the running backs, and then turnovers. Obviously, this is pretty obvious. You can't lose a turnover battle. I mean, you can't give it up 2, 3, 4 times and not get any yourself. There's just no way you can stay in the game.
Yeah. And this is my biggest concern too. I think it would probably be offensively. Now, Indiana's offense obviously this season has been, prolific, aside from that Michigan game, but Ohio State this season hasn't allowed more than 17 points to their opponents, aside from that Oregon game. And obviously Oregon's an elite team this season. The most they've allowed this season is 17 against Nebraska. Indiana has to be able to control the time of possession here as well. Really run that clock like they did against Michigan to help them hold off Michigan. And that all goes back to also establishing the run game because we didn't see that against Michigan a whole ton. But you got to keep that clock running against Ohio State because as good as I think Indiana's offense is this season, you don't want to get into a shootout with Ohio State on the road.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's going to be tough. And I mean, listen, they, this is Indiana's first. I mean, I guess Northwestern. There's some. This is going to be their first really true road test, in my opinion, at least from a crowd noise standpoint. Having to deal with a really loud crowd. I mean, I was at Michigan State. It wasn't that bad. Northwestern. But there's mainly IU fans. So when they're on offense, it's going to be tough. You're going to be battling that. That place is going to be rocking. And I'm with you. While Indiana, I think can score, you don't want this to be a 40-35. I mean, like you're getting into the 60s and 70s in points. You'd probably be better served to keep this, where maybe the total score is like in the 50s or something like that. I don't think getting into shootouts where Indiana wants to go. And I would guess Ohio State probably doesn't want to either, even though they've got a lot of weapons. They'd probably like for this game to not be, because when you get those kind of shootouts, crazy things can happen. But yeah, you're at Ohio State anywhere. You don't want to try to get in a shootout with a team that has that much skill on offense.
Yeah. Uh, uh, for the sake of predictions, I guess we can do predictions for this game, Matt. This is going to be a tricky one. I think it's probably the trickiest game all year that we predicted. Right now, Indiana, depending on where you look, they're about 12 and a half, 13 and a half point underdog. So just under a two touchdown underdog against Ohio State. ESPN's FPI gives the Hoosiers a 26.7% chance to win in Columbus here. The over-under is surprisingly is only 51 and a half. So Vegas is predicting a pretty low scoring game compared to what you'd think with these two offenses. This is a very tough game to predict because I could see both scenarios where Indiana goes in there and looks just overmatched against Ohio State with the talent level. But I can also see a scenario where Indiana's gonna be very productive, or sorry, very competitive. And that's kind of where I'm leaning right now. Is I think it's going to be a competitive game, even if Ohio State pulls away in the fourth quarter. I think Indiana will keep it close. Um, I know people aren't going to like this, but I think Indiana's going to drop this one on the road. But I think it's going to be competitive enough to where, the committee is going to have to take a look at this and say, okay, Indiana showed it can hang with Ohio State, especially in a road game like that. So I'll go Ohio State 28. I'll go Ohio State 28, Indiana 24. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. I think the score is going to be similar. I'll go 30-24, but I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be a competitive game. We'll see how it plays out. But this team has had 2 weeks to prepare. They asked me on the radio this morning, Indiana basically every week they brought it. And the one of the guys on 107 was like, that's rare, where every week he said, any fear of a letdown, or maybe them just having kind of and I was like, no, they had a poor half against Michigan, at least offensively, the second half, and they've had 2 weeks to prepare. I think this team is going to be really focused and really ready to play. And I think they're going to come out, and I think they're going to punch Ohio State in the mouth, and we'll see what happens. I mean, Ohio State's going to punch them in the mouth too. They're a really good football team. So, but I'll go 30-24. I am going to pick the Buckeyes, like I said. And most of my predictions this year, at least from a score standpoint, have been way off. So hopefully I'm off on not only the score, but the outcome.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And this is the first time all season that Indiana's going to go into a game, I believe, right? Because the UCLA game, I believe Indiana was favored. In that, I think everything else, every other game, they've been favored. So this is the first game of the year they'll go into a game as the underdog. And I really think this team operates best when they have that underdog mentality, that chip on their shoulder. And they've had 2 weeks to sit on that Michigan game, and Kurt Cignetti said, a win's a win, but we're not pleased with this performance. 2 weeks to sit on that Michigan game, kind of simmer on it with Ohio State now, looking ahead and getting that bye week. I really think Indiana's going to come out, at least start this game strong. Now, we'll see what happens when the game goes on and teams start making adjustments. But I think Indiana's going to come out of this game strong. Ohio State might be kind of trying to feel it out. And at the very least, I think the first half will be competitive, and then the second half will really dictate what happens after that.
Yeah, I agree. It should be. It's as interesting a game as I've covered with Indiana football, and I can't remember a more interesting game even before I started doing this job and was just watching Indiana as a fan. It's nuts that they're in this position, and it's going to be really interesting, and I think really fun to see how it plays out.
Yeah, significant implications on the line, obviously, to come out of this game, and there's going to be a lot of ripple effects from what happens in this game. But we will see. We'll have all three of us at the game on Saturday. It's a noon kick on Big Ten. Fox Big Noon Kickoff. I saw all three pregame shows. Matt are going to be there in Columbus, which I don't know how they're going to set all those sets up. But College Game Day is going to be there. Big Noon Kickoff is going to be there, and then the Big Ten Network tailgate is also going to be
Uh-huh.
there. So.
I knew about the first two. I didn't know Big Ten was going to be there as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, so they're bringing the whole they're bringing everybody there for this game, which rightfully so. Top five matchup, arguably the most important game you could say in the country this year, just with the amount of implications on the line in this one as well. So we'll see. It should be a fun one. Matt and I will be there along with Jeff Rabjohn. So we'll have full coverage as normal on Peegs.com. So that'll be fun to look out for. Noon kickoff in Columbus. So look forward to that. All right, Matt, let's turn our attention here to the mailbag. We asked you guys, the listeners on our VIP football board, for your questions for us to answer this week. I figured it was a good time coming off a bye week. There wasn't a game to talk about last week, so I figured it was a good time to do a mailbag. And that this is a good, I should mention this too. We are running a 75% off sale right now, or early Black Friday sale on Peegs.com. Get a 75% off annual membership. You won't regret it. Matt Weaver, best football recruiting reporter in the country, and then obviously everything else that Jeff Rabjohns and Trevor Andishak bring on the basketball side. So 75% off. Get it while you can. There won't be a better deal than this over on Peegs.com. All right, let's get into mailbag questions here. The first one is from Foods CIDOC. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. We'll go with that one though. Do you believe that next year's quarterback one is on the roster right now, or will it be a transfer? Matt, I'll let you start with that.
Well, I do expect them to bring in a transfer. I will be quite honestly shocked if they don't bring in a transfer quarterback. But I don't. Who wins the job, that'll be determined on the practice field. So and you would think obviously Taven Jackson will be heavily involved in that, and you still got Albert Mendoza and Tyler Terry, probably more in the background, but that'll be determined on the practice field. I don't know who the transfer will be. Who knows? But I think it could be Taven Jackson. It could be whoever they bring in. I mean, nobody's going to be guaranteed anything except a chance to compete. So we'll see how that plays out. But I will be very, very surprised if they don't bring in a transfer. I fully expect that to be the case.
Yeah. One person here, one player I think is a dark horse, maybe. I'm not gonna say he's gonna win the starting job, but I think he might be right there in the pecking order. Alberto Mendoza, he's really kind of shot up this year to third on the depth chart. True freshman. When Taven Jackson started that Washington game, Mendoza was the top backup there. So it will be interesting to see kind of what development he has over the offseason, if maybe he can push for maybe that top backup role next year. And then along with the transfer that Matt, you said, obviously you expect Indiana to bring a transfer. I wonder how that affects the quarterback room because obviously in this portal era, anybody can leave, anybody can come. So if they bring in a transfer, that does give me a little bit of pause. How does Tyler Cherry, how does Alberto Mendoza view that? Especially if it's a guy, a transfer that has multiple years of eligibility left. How do those guys see that? And then same thing with Taven Jackson. How does he view that if Indiana brings in a transfer? Does he want to sit another year? Assuming he competes and he doesn't win that job.
Yeah, and I think with the younger guys, I think it depends. Like you said, I think it depends on more what year is the transfer you bring in. If you bring in a guy who's like maybe just a year ahead of them eligibility, then that obviously has a pretty big impact on them because. But if you bring in like another Curtis Rourke type, who's basically a 1 year guy, I don't know that impacts them as much. Um, Obviously, it could have an impact, like you said, on Taven Jackson, and that to me is kind of the $64,000 question. If you bring in a portal quarterback, what does that mean for Taven? I mean, this is a guy that's been all in. You've seen it with his personality, the way like I said, I saw it after the UCLA game. You see it on the sideline. He's all in with Indiana, but at the same time, his career is not forever. He's only got a few years left, and if he's not playing, I don't blame a guy for looking for a place where he can go play. Even if whether he thinks he's an NFL guy or not, you only get to play football for so long. So that'll be interesting. I could very well see Taven winning the job, even if they bring in a transfer. He's a very talented guy, and I know the staff has high hopes for him. So, that's the kind of stuff that plays out. But your job as a coach and as a staff is to bring in the best players possible. I remember it real quick. I remember when Mark Hagan was a coach. He told me when he was in Indiana and he recruited D linemen, the whole staff, not just him, but they tried to recruit players better than what they had on the roster because that was the only way to maintain success. You couldn't be like, okay, well, this guy's good. We can kind of take this year off. No, you had to go out and try to find a guy who was better, even if you had like an all conference type player. And that's what you got to do as a staff. You bring in guys, try to bring in guys as good or better than what you have. And then if the guy you have currently wins the job, great. That competition's a great thing. So, like I said, this will be determined on the practice field. Cignetti knows what he's doing, and it'll be interesting, but it will be interesting to see how it plays out because there could be some hurt feelings if you go out and get a transfer in that room, with some of these guys.
Yeah, and let's be honest too. Kurt Cignetti and Mike Shanahan too. They've made a living off of transfer quarterbacks. I mean, every single transfer they brought in has succeeded. Curtis Rourke is right there, potentially a fourth straight conference player of the year at quarterback for this staff. I mean, with the success that they've had bringing in portal quarterbacks, I would not be surprised if the guy they go get is the guy they target as a starter next year. But obviously, things will have to play out on the practice field, so we'll see in that regard. But yeah, we're expecting a transfer will be brought in. We'll see who it is ultimately, but that won't be decided for a couple more months. So we'll wait on that. Next question from the same username: what do you think the ceiling is for this team now that we have seen the college football landscape settle a little bit? Don't think they're national title contenders, but I think they are right there in the thick. I would not be shocked if they go on a run in the CFP to a quarterfinal, semifinal type run.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, right now, I mean, their ceiling is they have a chance to play for the national title. I'm with you. I think there's probably obviously, may shouldn't say obviously, but 3 or 4 teams that are probably better than Indiana. But this team is not far. I mean, they're right there. I mean, and if you go into Ohio State and you play with the Buckeyes down the wire or even win the game, I mean, the ceiling is you could play for the national championship. It's not going to be easy, but like I'm with you. I think if they got the CFP, and obviously a little bit depends on your draw, who you get. But I don't know that there's a team out there that, Indiana is maybe that there's a team that's really a terrible matchup. They play good defense, they play good offense, the special teams is really solid. So I think they match up well with almost anybody in the country. But to me, the ceiling is they have a legit shot to play for the national championship.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Indiana's everything in front of it to play for. So, 10-0, it's tough to rule them out of any kind of scenario, even if that's national champion. It's very tough to count them out. All right, next question is from IT Guard NE. Is there another school in the country where the head football coach makes 9 million a year and he wouldn't feel an ounce of heat if he goes 7-5 in 2025? Uh, I've kind of thought about this question a lot. And it's funny now, kind of seeing Indiana fans sort of have to readjust their expectations to go from a 3-9 team to a 10-0 team, potentially in the CFP. Next year is going to be very telling because the schedule next year actually lines up very favorably for Indiana. Once again, they don't have to play Ohio State, they don't have to play Michigan. But I could see, I would not be shocked if there's some regression here. But that does not mean Indiana has having a bad season because how often is Indiana consistently a bowl team? Now, in this scenario, like you said, 7-5. For Indiana, considering their history, that is still a successful season. And I would agree with you. I don't think that there's a head coach in the country making as much money as Curt Cignetti will next year. That is least on the hot seat if a team goes 7-5 and regresses.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, this is how I mean, for basically my entire life, the ceiling for Indiana football, when they had a good year, was like 7 or 8 wins. I mean, they had the occasion. I mean, they never won obviously more than nine. And they did that twice, both times before I was even born. I think the floor with Curt Cignetti is now 7 or 8 wins. That's what I think he's done. I think he's raised the floor for Indiana to where I just think they'll be a bowl team every year. And will they go 10-0? I mean, next year's schedule, it is you don't have to play Ohio State, you don't have to play Michigan. You do have Oregon. You go to Penn State. Remember, I think you go to Iowa. So there are some tough games. I would say next year's schedule, the road schedule is more difficult than this year. I mean, you did not have super challenging, except for Ohio State, super challenging road schedule, and it is more difficult next year. It'll be interesting to see where those games fall. They haven't released the dates. We just know the teams and where they're going to be playing. But yeah, I mean, at Indiana, if he went 7-5 next year, now he might take some heat nationally after, because people are like, oh, it looked like a 1 year wonder type of thing if they went back to 7-5. But I don't think he would be. There may be some fans who, quite honestly, don't get it. I'm sorry, but they're screaming, oh, he's not that good because they went 7-5. I mean, if Indiana's football coach in his first year, let's just say Indiana goes 12, they go to a bowl, go 11-1, whatever. Let's just say they go 11-2 this year, 11, whatever it is, and he goes 7-5. That's 18 and 7 in his first 2 years. I mean, come on, like, come on. And the money, like I said, that he's generating in ticket sales, extra ticket sales, and all that kind of stuff, it's paying for his salary, in my opinion. So I think he's going to be here for a long time, and I think when he's done, I think there's going to be a statue of Curt Cignetti outside Memorial Stadium. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I would not be surprised at all. In this season, this season is very much an anomaly. I've said this before. Expecting Indiana to go 10-0, be in the CFP talk every year is probably not super realistic. Curt Cignetti will probably tell you otherwise. But if you're going 7-5 every year, 8-4 every year, I mean, you have to feel very good about that, especially at a school like Indiana, where that just does not happen on a regular basis. So, yeah, I mean, Curt Cignetti should feel very comfortable where he's at and in the seat that he's sitting in. And even if there's a little aggression, I would not, fault him at all for that. But obviously, we'll focus on this year. Next year's next year, and we'll talk through all that when the time comes. All right, next question. We've had a few of these questions, Matt, asked in different ways, but basically about facilities, more Memorial Stadium renovations. This is something that Scott Dolson has talked about a little bit. I know Jeremy Gray has talked about this a little bit. First of all, they're not going to rebuild a new stadium. So anybody hoping they're going to rebuild a new stadium like Northwestern is not going to happen. But I could see, short-term things like concourses, bathrooms, concessions, looking to add more suites, like actual premium level suites. I could see those things happening in the near future. Now things like adding, additional thousands, tens of thousands new seats, I think that's going to take a little more time to happen over time. But Indiana's still kind of in the middle stages of, drawing up concepts and renderings and stuff. So I think it'll be a little while until you start seeing or hearing any like official word on, things that they're going to do to renovate Memorial Stadium. Matt, have you heard anything in that regard?
No, and this is be more of a Rabby question. He's more in tune and got more of a feel of things with this. I did see the thing where Jeremy Gray talked about some stuff. I mean, it seems to me that Scott Dolson said the improvements to Memorial Stadium that they have in mind, which we don't have any details or specifics, but it's going to be more for the fans. So to me, that would be you're just going to make the stadium better. Make it more convenient. I've heard people say on the board. I guess you even for the men's bathroom. I mean, it's always been you always think about the girls. They always have to wait so long in line to go to the bathroom. But I guess even the men, there was a super long wait for the last couple of games. So stuff like that. I don't know if you can add bathrooms or what you can do to make it more convenient and not as much of a wait. I'm not really sure. I mean, let's be honest. I've told people this. Indiana's never really had to deal with this. They've never had 50,000 plus at every game. It's always been, that 30 to 35, maybe 40,000 kind of core of fans that they've had for years. This is all new for them. And they're probably, and I mean, I'm not making excuses, but they're probably trying to figure this out kind of as things go along. So, they've done a great job so far. Dolson and the administration, I think they've done a great job so far. I would expect the stuff they do to be very fan friendly, and it'll be interesting to see. I think when they get to like releasing kind of renderings or things they're going to do for the stadium, it'll be really interesting to see what it looks like. So I don't know anything specific other than kind of what's been said publicly.
Yeah. That brings up a good point too, because now obviously in the NIL era, you're allocating money in different ways that you hadn't before. So, it's like, how do you sort of, ask for NIL money on top of, money for facilities and stuff like that? It's a tough balancing act that Indiana's gonna have to figure out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, the good thing is you got a good product to sell for football. I remember when they went to the Gator Bowl. I remember somebody in the administration telling Rabby, we literally had people walking up with their checkbooks. Like, people are so excited, and I would think it's probably similar now. I don't know, but I mean, I think this is, there's just something. I mean, basketball is great. Don't get me wrong, but football games are like an event. I mean, basketball, people get in the car, you go down, you go to the game, you get back in your car, you go home because there's so many games and they're on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday or whatever it may be. A football game, it's a weekend deal. People, you see the campers. People come in from out of town. If they can get a hotel, they get it, and it's more of an event. And I just think there's more of a bonding for fans at a football game than for basketball, just because you're there all day, you're hanging out, you go to the bars, whatever it may be, whatever you may do, you tailgate, and it's such a different environment for football. And when you win, people get excited. They want to be part of that. They want to feel that more and more. And that's how you get them. Quite honestly, that's when you hit them up for those dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. It should be interesting to see how this all plays out going forward. But as of right now, we don't know a whole lot of renovations. I'm sure they are very much in the thick of working through all of that. So next question, Kurt S33. He says, "What are three keys for Indiana to be successful against Ohio State this weekend?" I'll take this first, Matt. Three keys. First one, you have to be able to limit Ohio State's run game. You cannot let their two-headed monster run all over you. Second key, the offensive line has to be much better. Indiana's does than they showed against Michigan, because Ohio State's defensive front is not going to get any easier. Got to be able to keep Curtis Rourke on his feet, give him time to throw. Third key, secondary. I'm looking for them to force takeaways in this game. If you can force a couple takeaways, and that kind of goes hand in hand with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, two really really good receivers. I'll be interested to see how D'Angelo Pons and Jameer Johnson hold down those two guys. So those are my three keys. Got to limit the run. Got to protect Curtis Rourke, and then you got to force takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like the offensive line's got to play well. I said that before. They played played really well for 9.5 games. They were up 17-3 on Michigan in the second half. They couldn't get anything going. And a big part was the O line. Defensively, I mentioned, you can't give up the big play, and that kind of goes hand, with the run game, slowing down the run. And then you talked about the takeaways. If you can get them into some really uncomfortable situations, third and long, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8, that plays off the run, slowing down the run. Then there's more chance, if you got to throw the ball farther downfield, there's more chance for more risk for something bad happening. And I think Will Howard's played really well this year, but he's a little bit different than what they've had in the past. He's not a super dynamic guy. He can run. He showed that against Penn State when he had to run and get some first downs, but I don't think he's going to kill you with his legs. To me, maybe kind of similar to the guy at Northwestern. Maybe I don't know if that's a great comparison, where he can make some plays with his legs, but he's probably not going to go 70 yards. And then special teams and turnovers. You got to be solid. You can't lose a turnover battle, and obviously special teams. Giving up a big play in special teams is like a turnover. So those would kind of be my keys. I might have gone over three, but those kind of my keys and what Indiana needs to do to stay in this game.
Yeah, that kind of goes with the next question from IU AMB 40. Thoughts on IU's path to victory? I think we kind of said it there. Another question from the same user. Gut feeling as of right now, do you think the coaching staff stays together next year? It's tough to say. You'd have to think that the increased salary pool for the assistants will help in that regard, but I mean, Mike Shanahan and Brian Haynes are going to be hot commodities this year, and if a good school comes to them with a head coaching job, I think it's going to be very tough for them to turn that down. And same thing with just the position coaches, Buda Williams, a Rod Ojong, those kind of guys. Do they have aspirations to be coordinators? And if they do, if a team comes calling, it's going to be tough for them to turn it down. So I think it's going to be tough to keep the entire staff together, but I think they'll keep most of the staff together, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I'll say about coordinators getting head coaching jobs, and I've said this in the past. I mean, Ball State opened up. Brian Haynes is a Ball State alum. He was like a 4-year starter there. There could be some sentimental kind of tug at the heartstrings type of thing to go there, but when you sit down and think about it, and I've said this before, Kane Womack left a pretty good mid-major job to go be the DC at Alabama. Chip Kelly, obviously not. Chip Kelly's a little bit different because he was starting to feel the heat. It was probably maybe a year or two away from losing his job. But I think guys are going to be really selective. And if you're making 1 point, I mean, Brian Haynes, I think is over a million, was already over $1 million or right
Yeah.
around it. Let's just say he gets a little bit of a bump in pay. If you're making 1.2, 1.3 at Indiana, is it worth it? I mean, I don't know that Matt Ball State can pay you that. And even if you build a decent program, you're going to get cherry picked every year. I think guys are going to be real. Now, let's just say hypothetically, like James Madison opened up. I think those guys would be very interested. They know the school, and that's a really good job. That's probably the best job in that conference. If it's not the best, it's right there at the top. Ball State at best is mid-level MAC. To me, if I'm a coordinator, not just in Indiana, at any big school, I'm not leaving them for a group of 5 job unless it's like one of the top 2 or 3 jobs, like a Toledo in the MAC or a James Madison or a Boise State, jobs like that are really, really good. And there's that the commitment's there to be good in football. Otherwise, I just don't know that it makes sense. I mean, gun to my head, I think the staff will be back. But I also, on the same, like I wouldn't be shocked if one or two of them, get plucked away. I don't worry about that much. I know that was a concern with Allen because it fell apart when he started losing guys. I don't think that's going to be the case with Curt Cignetti. I guarantee you he will go out and he'll hire good coaches. So, if it does happen, my thing is I think the coordinators will be here. And, here's the other interesting thing about the coordinators. Both of Indiana's coordinators could make it all the way to the finalists for the Broyles Award. If they don't make it to the finalists, they may make it to the round. Before I can't remember how many rounds there are, but they've got a good shot. Urban Meyer mentioned that. They could both be finalists for the Broyles Award, which is amazing. That's just incredible, and it shows the work. So, if a really good mid-major job opens up, I don't think they're going to leave for another coordinator job. I think the only way that either one of those guys leave is for a head coaching job at a place where you can really be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it would be very tough to see either Shanahan or Haynes leave unless something really, really enticing opens up. There's your answer to that. Last question here from IU AMB 40. What 2 position groups do you think IU hits the hardest in the portal? First one we talked about already, quarterback. Indiana is going to go out, they have to go out and find a quarterback to at least compete for that starting job. Just with the amount of success they've had finding portal quarterbacks. And then second, they're going to have to hit the D line hard because you're going to lose Mikhail Kamara. Not Kamara. You're going to lose Linnell Carr. You could lose Kamara, I guess, in the NFL draft. You're going to lose James Carpenter. You're going to lose C.J. West. So you really got to beef up that the defensive line. So I would say quarterback, defensive line are probably two, and then wide receivers probably right there as well because you're going to lose a bunch of guys in the receiver room.
Yeah, I agree with those. I would say defensively, I think the number one position is though safety. The only guy you're getting back is Amari Farrell, who's played any. I mean, Bryson Bonzo, I technically can be back, but he's basically just been a special teams player, and you're losing a ton of safeties. Now they got some young guys, and they're bringing in some young guys. Byron Baldwin, who just committed, Keontae Stewart, who's listed as a corner but could be a safety. They're both going to be mid-year guys, so they could compete for playing time. But safety's huge. D line, and when I say D line, I'm talking all the positions, edge and D tackle. I could see like 3 to 4, maybe 5 total. And I say that for all the positions combined. A sneaky one on offense is O line. And I say that, you're going to lose Kadick, you're going to lose Wedig. I don't, who knows what Kidwell does. I don't know if he'll try to appeal for an 8th year, which would be interesting. And then, Drew Evans getting this Achilles injury kind of throws a little bit of a monkey wrench because you felt like you probably had 3 starters coming back, and he could still start, but he's going to miss spring ball. I mean, this injury is going to put him out for spring practice. He should be back by the summer. Achilles usually about 9 months, I think. Could be a little bit quicker, but he's a big guy, so I would think it's going to be the full length of time. I could see them bringing in 3, 4 guys from the portal on the O line, which is, Bostad's not a big fan of that, but you may have to. And the other reason why is they need to get some linemen in between senior and freshman. They're kind of top heavy and bottom heavy. There's not a whole lot in the middle when you look at the roster. They need some guys like some redshirt sophomores, some juniors who maybe, have a year or two. And some of these guys may not be starters right away, but they need to kind of balance out. They're real top heavy and bottom heavy at O line. So that's kind of a, and then receiver. I mean, they only got 2 guys back who've caught a pass this year, or expected to have 2 guys back that caught a pass this year in Cooper and Surratt. They're going to have to go get at least probably 3 guys at receiver.
Yeah. Next question here, Matt. This one is for you from BWH123. How much of an impact is this season success having with the 26 recruiting class? Have you heard anything from those guys?
Well, I mean, I'll kind of point to what I asked. I asked Coach Cignetti this yesterday. My second question was, obviously they went out on the road earlier this year, the bye week, and then again this past week. And I just asked them, is the reception that you're receiving different from what it was maybe earlier in the season where they were getting a good reception, but now you've gone 10-0? And he said, yeah, it's made a major impact on recruiting, specifically for 26 guys. It's still early. They've had 26 guys on campus, but and I'm not saying that staff's not focused on 26, but they're still in the 25 mode. And even though the portal's not open, let's be honest, coaches across the country know, or at least have an idea of guys who are going to be going to the portal. And I would say like Indiana, like all staffs is starting to get their ducks in a row about, okay, if this guy does go in the portal, we want him. If this guy goes, if we lose this guy, there may be guys, on the set, on their roster that they're concerned about losing. If we lose him, okay, we may have to go get some more depth at this position. So they're still kind of in that mode. 26 is, they're recruiting it obviously, but that'll become more of a focus, I think, once you get through portal season in December and you get into the new year and they go back out on the road again in spring. That'll be when you'll start to see some stuff shake out as far as, how much hay have they made with the 26 class. But I do think they're going to have a chance to have a really good 26 class because obviously the season they're having this year.
Yeah, and we've seen a couple flips already with Tyrone Burris flipping to IU, and you have to imagine a lot of other guys are going to get looks, are going to look Indiana's way here that might already be committed to other schools. So, yeah, obviously this season is going to have huge ripples, and we saw, I hate to go back to the last coaching regime too much, but we saw what Tom Allen was able to do with the 2019 and 2020 seasons and how they were able to parlay that into recruiting success as well. So it can only be good things here for the 26 recruiting class going forward. All right. Next question is from IU family. What do you expect to see out of Ohio State this weekend? Will they stay balanced on offense, or will they try and shorten the game by pounding it on the ground? This one's a little tougher to answer because we obviously don't cover Ohio State as closely as we do Indiana. You'd have to imagine they're going to try to establish a run game early, see if they can get Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins going early, and then mix in that passing game, obviously, with those 2 talented receivers on the outside. I don't think this is going to be a game where Ohio State's going into it thinking they're going to have to shorten the game. I think Ohio State's going to play their game, and I think they're going to try to score a ton of points. And if it doesn't work, they'll have to adjust. But I think getting the run game going for them, especially because Indiana has the number one run D in the nation, so you have to think Ohio State's going into that game saying we got to get the run game going before we get anything else going.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Ohio State, I'm sure they have a ton of respect for Indiana because of what they've done. They're going to play their game. I mean, this is the Ohio State Buckeyes. I mean, they've been here a million times. They're going to play their game. I'm sure there's, every opponent you tweak your game plan a little bit, but they're not going to play. They're not going to play. My opinion, they're not going to play scared against Indiana or anybody. They're going to play their game. They're going to do what they do. They're going to try to hit some big plays. They're going to try to run the ball. They're going to do what they do and what they've tried to do every week. It doesn't mean they've not. I mean, the Nebraska game, they struggled to do that. They struggled offensively, but they're going to play their game and they're going to see how it plays out. So Indiana needs, like we talked about, they need to be good against the run and not give up some big plays. But Ohio State's not going to go in there and be like, oh, we can't do this or we got to do this. Short, I don't. They're going to play their game.
Yeah.
They've got a ton of talent. They can play with anybody in the country.
All right, next question is from K Toth, KTOTH05. How seriously should IU fans take the discussions around 10-2 SEC teams getting a playoff bid over a potential 11-1 Indiana? Is this just a narrative being pushed by SEC proxies or something the committee may actually consider? I actually think, we'll see what happens tonight on the rankings for the CFP, how Indiana being on a bye week sort of affects them. But I think the fact that Indiana rose all the way to number 5 last week says a lot about how the committee views Indiana. And I would be shocked if one loss on the road to Ohio State, granted it's not a blowout, I would be shocked if it knocks Indiana severely because we've seen other teams like Miami. They got upset by Georgia Tech and they only fell 5 spots to number 9 in the CFP rankings, and they were previously undefeated. So I would be pretty shocked if one loss to Ohio State does a significant blow to Indiana's resume. I think a lot of this, what you're seeing on social media, I think a lot of it is, kind of SEC bias, if you will. The way that the committee has operated this year, I think they've been pretty fair to Indiana, and I just don't really see. I find it really hard to believe that they're going to keep a one-loss Indiana out over a 2 or 3 loss SEC team.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, like we've talked about it, if they go out there and they get their doors blown off at Ohio State, you lose by 3, 4, even more touchdowns, then you're in trouble. If you go in there and you play really competitively, I think Indiana's put themselves in a position where they still have a really good chance to stay in the playoff. Now, obviously, you're probably going to drop down to like 10 or 11 or whatever it may be towards the bottom, but you'd still be in, and that's the biggest thing. Just try to keep that invitation to the party and see what happens.
Yeah. All right, next question is from Brody IU. How big do you see the transfer class being next year? And we kind of talked about this, Matt, but do you have like maybe a number in mind that IU might try to shoot for this portal season?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously attrition can change this because we don't know. There could be some guys leave. I'll be surprised, and I think I posted this on the board. I'll be surprised if it's less than 20. I think it'll be around, and I don't think it's going to be as big as last year, which was I think close to 30 and 28, 29. And I know a couple of those guys have left. Could it get to 25? I guess, but there would have to be some attrition. And also, you mentioned earlier, there are some 25 guys that still could be in play for Indiana that are committed to other schools. Don't really want to get into it too much. I mean, some names have been floated out there, but there are some names, and they would be they'd be really nice gets if Indiana is able to possibly flip them. And we'll see how that all plays out. There's still some time with that, but I think it'll be around 2021 is my best guess right now.
Yeah. Next question. We already talked about the stadium, potential stadium renovations, so we'll skip over that. Next one from RBKL. Can you talk about the Ohio State versus Indiana injury situation on both sides? This week on Monday, Chris Cignetti said Indiana, they expect everybody to be at full strength, so that includes Miles Price, Justice Ellis, and those guys who are banged up against Michigan. Ohio State, I believe their starting left tackle did not play last week, but I don't know what his availability is going to be like this week. But other than that, I believe Ohio State is fairly healthy. At least their key players are. So I think you're going to see a pretty healthy team on both sides of the ball there. He also, another question from RBKL. It seems like Tyler Stevens might be a potential area that the Buckeyes may exploit. Can you talk about what you've seen from him film-wise and your thoughts on his ability to hold his own? Matt, I'll let you start on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, I think it may be unfair to say Tyler Stevens was the reason why the O line struggled against Michigan because I thought there were struggles across the entire O line. I saw guys coming off the edge. It wasn't just on his side. So I thought he played a solid game. I thought the run game, he did a solid job. So, I to me the entire offensive line has to play well. This isn't about one guy. And I think we heard at the Michigan game that Evans injury. We don't know for sure, but I think I heard it might have been later in the week, which means let's just say it happened on like Thursday. That means that's the last day of real practice. I mean, Friday's more of a walkthrough. So if that happened then, Stevens may have gotten hardly any reps at all with the first team offense. So that's a big deal. He's now had 2 weeks. He's going to have a bunch of reps. He's the guy. So, even though he may have struggled some, like I said, I thought really all five guys struggled at some point during that game. It wasn't like it was just one dude. So I think he'll be fine. It's the whole line's going to have to play well. For them to do well. Real quick on the House, I don't know a lot about Ohio State injuries. I looked at their injury report for Northwestern. They had like 3, 6. They have 9 guys. Um, with left tackle, they actually did move their left guard. I think it's Donovan Jackson. They moved him to left tackle, and then they put somebody in at left guard. So I think he's going to be left tackle for the remainder of the season. I don't know these guys. Who are these guys? I don't know enough about their roster. I don't know if these are big losses or not. So I would expect Ohio State to have a pretty healthy team. Just wanted to throw that in there real quick because I looked it up. But I think they'll be pretty healthy. We know Indiana's pretty healthy. They've been, and hopefully that continues. So I don't think health's going to be a big issue in this game.
Yeah. I'll add on to Tyler Stevens too. I think a lot of people see him as a backup, the sixth lineman that was coming in jumbo sets and say, how are they going to survive with I mean, Tyler Stevens played 3.5 years, started 3.5 years at JMU. He was an all Sun Belt guy, uh, played basically every single position on the offensive line at JMU. He knows how the offense runs. He knows what system they want to play. I think he'll be just fine. Given that he's had the bye week, and plus an extra week of practice. I think he'll be fine at left guard there, to filling in for Drew Evans. I don't really have any concerns there. Last two questions, Matt. This one from Brian 20, just a bunch of numbers. I'll call you Brian. How likely is Cignetti to stay at IU until retirement if he maintains a high level of success? Um, is he tied to IU long term, or could he look elsewhere for a larger salary? Uh, if he maintains this level of success, he basically has his pick'em of where he could want to go until retirement, I suppose. If he keeps churning out 10-0 seasons. But the fact that Indiana came to him with a contract extension and the fact that he's already getting paid like a top 20 coach in the country, I don't think it's all about money for Curt Cignetti at this point. He has the money that he could have only dreamed of when he took that IU Pennsylvania job. And he's gotten the commitment from Indiana that they're going to continue to support him in everything he needs. There will be a lot to play out. We can't predict the future, obviously. But I think he likes where he's at IU, and I think he's gonna have a tough time leaving now that this extension is locked in.
Yeah, I'll say this. I think Brian kind of answered his own question. He says, how likely is Coach Kirkson to stay at IU until retirement if he maintains a high level of success? Well, if he's got a high level of success, why would you leave? I mean, to me, the reason why he would leave is because he doesn't think he can win at Indiana because they're not giving him the resources. Well, if you have a high level of success, then obviously you're getting the resources you need to win. He's going to get paid, appropriately for the success he has. So if he's maintaining a high level of success, I don't know why he would leave. I don't think I think Kirsten Eddy will finish his career in Indiana. That's my prediction. Now, can things go? Could Scott Dolson in 2 years not be the AD for whatever reason, and they bring an AD who doesn't value football or whatever it may be? I don't think that's going to happen. I'm just throwing out like a crazy scenario, and they don't support the program to where he thinks it needs to be supported. But as long as and Scott Dolson looks like him, he's not. He's got a number of years left. I think Curt Cignetti will retire from coaching as the Indiana head coach, and I think it will be after a bunch of wins. And like I said, my prediction is when he's done, there will be a statue of him because he will do things with this program that have never ever been done in the history of Indiana football. So, like I said, if he's maintaining high level success, I don't know why we'd leave, especially since Indiana showed they're going to pay, and if he keeps winning, they'll continue to pay. So, I don't see him going anywhere. That's my opinion.
Yeah, to add on to, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, even like way before the extension. They're asking me, do you think it happens, the extension? What would I pay? I've always thought that Kurt Cignetti wants to be at a program where he has ownership over sort of changing the legacy of that program. Whereas if he were to go to a Florida, if he were to go to a Florida State where they've already had past success and they don't necessarily need him to be their savior, I think Kurt Cignetti kind of relishes in that idea of being the savior of a program and having potentially now he's not going to think I want a statue built, but it kind of in that same vein where I think he really likes that idea of being able to come in and turn around a program and say, hey, I did this on my own. I was the guy that did this. And for him to do that at Indiana, you can't get that anywhere else. I suppose if you go to Vanderbilt, maybe. But at Indiana, this is his chance to really sort of cement his legacy at a place where you can't do that at most other P4 programs.
He said it earlier this season. I can't remember when it was. He said, "I operate best when I'm the underdog."
Yeah.
He went to IUP when nobody else would have taken that job. I mean, he left a job at Alabama under Nick Saban to go to IUP, and that was a risk. I think Indiana. I said this. I think it fits him perfectly because this Indiana is a perennial underdog. I mean, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. And if you go to Alabama or Notre Dame and win, yeah, that's great. They're going to love you, but you're just going to be another guy that did it. You go to Indiana and, even if you never win a national title, but let's say you get in the playoff a bunch of times and you win a number of bowl games when you don't make it to the playoff, you're going to go down in history. You're going to go down as a guy who did something that nobody else could do at a place where it's never been done before. And I think that does appeal to him. Now, again, Indiana is going to have to make it, so he wants to stay, and that means it's infrastructure support. As long as they do that, and he's winning, I don't see any reason for him. I don't see any reason why he would go anywhere else. I think this will be his last job.
Yeah, no, I'm on that same wavelength as well. All right, last question here to round us out from Mid-Century Guy. Do you see any of our underclassmen entering the draft early? The only draft eligible guys that have eligibility left that I could think of that could go to the draft. You're thinking, Aiden Fisher. I think he comes back. Carter Smith. I think he comes back. Mikael Kamara could be an interesting one just because of the season he's having. He's been terrific this year. Still number one in the nation in pressures. He is undersized, which is a bit of a knock on him. So it would be interesting to see sort of where he fits in, on an NFL roster. But other than that, man, am I missing anybody? Kamara, I guess Elijah Surratt as well. But I also think he comes back. But out of those guys, do you think any of them leave?
No, and I mean, to me, if I'm McCall Kamara and I'm somebody close to him, I put my name in that, the thing with the advisory council for where the NFL gives you feedback. And why not? I mean, he's had a great season. See what they have to say. If they tell you, hey, you're going to be a day three pick, I don't know that it makes sense to go out because you might be able to make just as much or more in NIL for 1 year. And you might be able to improve your draft stock a little bit. You're probably not going to go from a fourth or fifth round pick to a first round pick, but you can go from fourth or fifth to maybe third, and you get a little bit more security, a little bit more money, and you get to play college football for another year. But I think Carter Smith I think he's got a chance at the NFL. I think he needs another year. And playing for Boatstead, I think Carter Smith could be, I don't know if he'll be a first round pick. He may be, but I think he's a guy that could be in the first couple rounds. But I think he needs to stay. But yeah, to me, it's Kamara or I can't see anybody else. I guess Surratt could maybe put his name out there, but I think he's only done it for 1 year at this level. I think Kamara is the only guy that I wouldn't be surprised if we went pro. If anybody else went pro, I'd be pretty surprised.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like Jameer Johnson's a redshirt junior, but I don't see him going pro early. Marcus Burris, I don't see him going pro early. I think that's it, right?
Yeah, I guess if maybe if Farrell or Pons were juniors, maybe you could see them. I still think they would need more time, but they've had some moments. But yeah, those are the only guys that, like you said, that are draft eligible that I could see exploring that possibility. Nobody else jumps out to me as a guy who it would make any sense to even think of to entertain that thought.
Yeah. And this is sort of my own question to you, Matt, because this is also a different discussion with regarding NFL talent. Now, Indiana obviously has thrived on sort of these group of five guys who were under recruited, underlooked, coming out of high school. But when you talk about projecting to the next level, when you take a guy like Mikael Kamara, who's only 6'1", 6'2", for DNs in the NFL, you want them to be around 6'4", 6'5". And then, other guys like Elijah Stratton, he doesn't have like any elite athletic traits. So these kind of guys that they're taking from the mid majors, the production is obviously on par with, guys you see going to the draft. I do wonder how much their limited, maybe athletic upside and profile would hinder that long term too.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, I don't know what Kamara's testing numbers. I mean, he looks explosive on the field, and he's probably a guy where there are some DNs where you can play him. They can play in the four man front or three. He might be better in a front where you kind of maybe. I know he's played his hand on the ground, but maybe you stand him up, or he may be just like he may be, you know, a specialty guy, a situational pass rusher. You bring him in on third downs and you let him just go try to get the quarterback because he's really good at that. I don't know. I think there's a spot. He's got a chance. I should say, I think there's a chance that there's a spot for him in the NFL. But I think it's one of those things where a lot of guys, like I said, they're a fit no matter what. You know what I mean? You take some dude, who plays at Alabama or whatever, they can play no matter what. He may need to find the kind of right situation where he'll fit better. Surratt, one of the I'd love to know what Surratt runs. I have no idea. I don't think he's got elite speed. I don't think he's got bad speed, but I'm curious. I mean, to me, Surratt probably would have to run at worst low 4.5s, and really probably 4.4s, high 4.4s would be okay because he's a bigger guy. Like Omar Cooper would probably have to really be in the 4.4s. You know what I mean? Just to throw his name out there. So, yeah, Kamara's the only guy. I could see him possibly testing the waters, at least putting his name out there, see what they say. But I'd be really surprised if anybody else went. I think you make a good point. Some of these guys, even though they're really productive college players, does it necessarily translate to the next level with what they're looking for physically?
Yeah. All right. So we'll see on that, but that will wrap up the mailbag portion of this podcast. Thank you, folks, for joining, or I guess sending in our questions as always. Matt, last thoughts here going into Ohio State week. We have the CFP reveal tonight. Just any thoughts as a whole on sort of the bye week going into Ohio State week? What is ahead? The implications of this week? Anything to sort of wrap us up here?
No, I mean I'm looking forward to it. I honestly, Ohio State's one of my selfishly, I told you, it's one of my favorite places to go. They give you good parking, and the food they serve is usually pretty good. I know that doesn't matter to fans. It's a great press box. They take care of you well there, and it's a good environment. Obviously, the Horseshoe. I'm interested to see where Indiana. I would guess they'll be where they were. I don't know last week. I mean, right around fifth. I mean, as far as the ranking, I'm sure they'll see it'll be different because people get bumped ahead of them. But I'm looking forward to this game. It's usually when Indiana goes to Ohio State, you're not looking forward to it as an IU beat writer because it's usually going to be a beat down. But I'm really looking forward to this game. I think Indiana's going to go over there and play well and give them a heck of a game.
Yeah, it should be a fun one. Noon kick in Columbus, number 5 Indiana versus number 2 Ohio State. It'll be on big noon kickoff on Fox. We'll have all three of us, Matt Weaver, myself, and Jeff Rabjohns will be there in Columbus for full coverage. You folks, as you guys know, can always follow us over on Peegs.com leading into the game. And then obviously on game day, we'll have much more to come from that game as well. That'll do it for this week, folks. Thanks so much for sending in your questions. And Matt, thanks for joining me this week. And we'll see you folks over in Columbus on Saturday.